Hello, everyone. My guest today is Ryan Suleiman. He's a composer and teaches composition at Berklee College of Music. Thanks for being here, Ryan. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Um, in a week or so, I believe you will be teaching some high schoolers composition topics at BOCO. What has your experience been like working in this program?
Thank you for having me, Amog. And yeah, that's right. I will be teaching high schoolers in about a week. This will be my third, maybe fourth year doing that program, high school composers intensive at BOCO. And it is very intensive. It's 2 weeks long, and the composers all write, pieces, like 3 pieces in the course of 2 weeks, and that all get performed, which is faster than I've ever written any music. So, but it's very interesting. I mean, getting to work with teenagers, I think is especially interesting because they're so full of creativity and curiosity, and everyone's so excited to not be in sort of their regular high school classes, and just to be focusing on what they're really passionate about, and it's a really interesting, fun experience, and very, very dynamic. A lot of creativity there.
I can actually relate with what you said because a few weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, I was teaching I was a mentor for one of the Berklee EPD programs, and I think they're just so curious, and it's kind of humbling in some sense, the things they do and say. What kind of music were you listening to when you were a teenager? You briefly mentioned to me once in passing that you heard some Linkin Park.
Oh yeah.
I'm curious about your early music influences, not necessarily restricted to classical music.
Yeah, thanks. I think the teenage years are I think music is especially important for every just person. Is it because you're sort of forming your identity in a way, you're figuring out what's the music you listen to is so much a part of how you kind of stake out your individuality. Also, you're trying to kind of become your own person. In my younger, kind of early teens, Linkin Park was really, one of my favorite bands. But in my teens, I was also getting into classical composition too. And I was discovering Beethoven and Mozart for myself, but also learning about Stravinsky and Debussy. And wasn't that familiar with Takemitsu, who's another important influence now, but kind of the early 20th century composers, and
Mm-hmm.
which for me at the time sounded really modern, and different. And what else? St. Vincent is artist who I listened to a lot in high school. The band Beirut was another artist who has no connection to Beirut or Lebanon, but I don't know if you do know. Yeah.
Postcards from Italy, if you know that song.
Yeah.
Mm.
I learned to play it on the ukulele. It says yeah. So that was that was really one of my favorite bands. Fairuz also Lebanese pop artist. Listen to a lot of her. So yeah.
That's cool. I know you've mentioned in other places that you also had this relationship with nature. So alongside music, I think nature meant a lot to you. Could you explain?
Yeah, actually, that also goes back to my teenage years too. I think for me, where I grew up in Sacramento, we lived next to the American River, which is the main river in that city, and I would very frequently go for walks along the bike trail, and that's kind of where I, went to be creative or sort out your sort of teenage angst thoughts, and figure out what do I think of the world, what am I doing, so. And that's still kind of the case for me too. Nature is, and so nature, in addition to being an important part of my musical inspiration, nature, being in nature has actually always been a really critical part of my process of, and just not just music, but figuring out what life is, and having space to think. And I think that's part of what attracted me to nature, and then becoming interested in understanding nature, and what it is. Like it's like maybe literally it's like the environment. It's not a separate thing, right? Like we live in the environment, so it's so like understanding it seems like maybe the single most important thing, you know.
Out of curiosity, what are your favorite nature spots in the Boston area?
Yes. So I've only been here about 4 years, but you know, when I move anywhere or when I'm traveling anywhere, like I look at, you know, the Google Maps and I find where are like the green spaces, you know, and like one of the largest green spaces, which happens to be pretty close to us in Somerville, is the Fells or Middlesex.
Oh yeah.
Have you been there?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's like one of my favorite spots as well, like to go hiking and for trails. Boston Public Gardens is also just a great spot, or the Esplanade, and what's the place? Harvard Arboretum, also a great spot.
Do you find yourself incorporating natural ideas inspired by natural imagery in your music often?
Yeah, actually a lot. I think when we first moved here, I wrote a lot of pieces that are kind of explicitly about like natural like things here. Like, you know, I have a piece called Snow Day, which for me is a new experience having grown up in California. Maybe for you too. I don't know how much snow you got where you're from, but like I wrote a piece that was about like not the parks in the area, like what else? I wrote a piece called Fireflies, which also is like, you know, kind of a, for me at least, like as a kind of someone living here, you know, recently, is a little bit my way of like, oh, just kind of getting to know the natural world in the New England. Yeah.
In addition to taking, let's say, more picturesque depictions of nature and trying to use those influences in your music, you've also used the pressing issue of climate change as inspiration too. So I know you have an orchestral piece called Burning, which was about the wildfires in California. What has that process been like? Let's say you're no longer romanticizing nature as this completely serene and usually picturesque thing, but you're now portraying it as something that's changing and something that's being impacted by human activity, and not really in a positive way. What has that shift been like?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. I feel like when we think of music or nature and music, we usually we imagine like these sort of pictorial, picturesque, idyllic places, which are not necessarily bad, but I think like if I'm interested in nature and understanding nature, then that means I need to really actually pay attention to nature, right? Which includes both the beauty and the destruction that's happening. And I think, you know, in general, it's best to not only think about the beauty or only think about the, you know, destruction that's happening. We have to really find a way to acknowledge both things. And so like the very first piece that I wrote that was sort of consciously engaging with the environmental crisis was a piece called Drought, which is about drought. And it kind of like sort of conveys, I don't know, like drying up of landscapes. And in a way, like it was an important piece for me, but I feel like it was a little simple, like drought, write a piece about drought. So, you know, over time, I'm like trying to understand like what is the point of writing a piece that is quote about climate change, right? And for me, again, like it comes back to this idea of really, as artists, I think, you know, one of the things that art can do really well is help us understand and help us look at the world around us in like a real way, you know, which again means both acknowledging what the beautiful things that we are surrounded by, but also the suffering that's happening. And so for me, like, if I'm interested in nature, I have to like look at fires that are happening. And in California, you know, with the wildfires, you really like, I was lucky never to have to actually evacuate from a fire, you know, or never, like my house never burned. Like there are people who this happened to, you know, but what you do experience is the smoke and like the very like really that you almost can't even see the sun actually. So that you literally cannot ignore it. It's there, you know, and you're actually breathing it in and you can smell it, you know, And so that, I thought about that a lot, and I thought it's actually, I mean, obviously, you know, we should take care of our health and our lungs, but I also feel in a certain way, like maybe metaphorically, it's actually really important to breathe in the smoke, you know? Like we should be looking at what's happening, you know? Kind of like, you know, typically when there are, you know, loggers deforest an area, they avoid deforesting it too close to the highway, right? Because they don't want people to see the destruction. But I think we should look at the destruction that's around us. And again, that doesn't mean we have to dwell on it necessarily, but it just means that we should engage with it and think about it. And so for me, like a piece like Burning, you know, there's sort of like a very eerie, interesting on like a sort of physiological level, the phenomenon of smoke. Smoke is a very interesting phenomenon to observe on sort of just a purely objective level. But obviously, like when we're looking at the smoke and when we're smelling the smoke, it has not just a kind of objective aesthetic meaning, but it has a very deep emotional and symbolic meaning too. Like it means that people are losing their houses. It means that, you know, animals are dying and the forests are being lost, and you know, and it demonstrates, you know, the perils of climate change, of the changing earth, you know. So those aspects, like the emotional aspect, the philosophical aspect, for me, those are the parts about nature that are the most interesting, actually, more than necessarily like depictions of birds or waterfalls, which is fine, which is not that there's anything wrong with that, but I just think like where nature is really interesting is in the way that it is philosophical, you know. Yeah.
So you just mentioned the kind of pieces that could be inspired by, say, a waterfall or the beach or a sunset or something like this. In a way, those pieces are very safe because they usually inspire some kind of positive emotion. But in the case of trying to depict the completely negative impact that humans are having on the climate and nature in general, it's likely that some audience members probably feel some kind of discomfort or some kind of a different reaction, a reaction that's not completely positive. So I'm curious, has your audience engaged with those kinds of pieces in a different way? Because it's not just this aesthetic statement about nature being nice or whatever. Alongside the more musical ideas about, say, death and destruction, you're also making this slightly social or political kind of there's a social or political undertone to it as well. Do you find that to be the case? And if so, how has your audience maybe reacted differently to this new stimulus?
Sure. Well, I will say for me, like, maybe it's not necessarily new, but it's something that has become more and more important for me and other people too, right? Of course, like, so I think, I mean, the main reaction that I've gotten for pieces like Burning is just people felt that it was a very emotional piece. And I haven't had anyone really say they were discomforted by it, but I mean, I would imagine, of course, it is uncomfortable in a certain way to sit with that space, but I think also it can help people process their feelings. And I also feel that it's not that, like, if I want to think about like what are my goals as a composer, which there's a certain danger too in trying to think too much about what you want the audience to think, you know, because really, like, as a composer, I think you have to just write the piece and think of how you feel about it and what you're feeling. And over time, I've, you know, in speaking with audiences about different reactions to my music, like, I realized that I actually can't control the way that they're going to react, which I really should have known much earlier. But I think, yeah, like, your question's about a reaction, right? I think I'm not trying to write pieces necessarily that are like making people depressed either, because I also don't think that's helpful, you know. There was a movie I saw once called Beatrice at Dinner, or Beatrice for Dinner, and it was about, like, it was kind of an indie film. It was sort of marketed as like a rom-com a little bit, but it ended up being more like she's sort of contemplating just like the kind of hopelessness of climate apocalypse, and, well, not to give a spoiler, but she ends very darkly. And I just thought, like, this is just depressing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And again, like admire someone for making a film like that, but also I don't see the usefulness of it, you know? Like, what is the usefulness of despair? Like, it's kind of giving up, you know? So for that reason, I think, like, if I can think of what the goals are of my pieces, you know, and it's still, I think it's relevant to think of, you know, I hope that it can help the audience process the way they're feeling, you know, and like to face their feelings and to face what is happening, because I think that's a really important thing, to actually look around at what's happening, and but also to feel all the feelings, not just despair, but also, you know, beauty, and recognize that maybe it's a me thing, but like recognize that things are not just binary. It's not just everything bad, everything is good. Things are bad and good, and there's in between as well, you know. So if I can think of like reactions, I hope that they react by just seeing that like nature is both, there are both sad things happening to the environment, and it's still beautiful and resilient also. And, you know, even though yes, there has been a lot of loss, as there always is, there is also a lot of beauty and a lot of things to look forward to also. That's my aspiration, at least.
I think you're the only guest I've had who also has a podcast, and I know you frequently cover discussions with other artists, so musicians and painters, dancers, I believe, and you speak to them about their relationship with nature and how they portray it in their work. What has that experience been like, and how did it start?
Yeah, so I have this podcast, Reflections on Music and Nature, and that was kind of, it's something I had wanted to do for a really long time, and, you know, I never quite had the time, and then the pandemic happened in 2020, and we all had a lot more time, or many of us had more time, so I decided to take that opportunity to actually start this podcast. And, you know, for me, I was, you know, at that time I was in grad school, so I spent a lot of time thinking about what I am trying to do with my music and where I'm sort of trying to go artistically. And, you know, again, like I said, I think nature is such a complex topic, and I knew it was always important in my music, but I really wanted to deal with the topic in a way that actually means something, and that isn't kind of silly or, you know, like slapping a label on a piece and saying, oh, it's about nature now, like something like meaningful, like ask, why am I dealing with this topic? And so and it's obviously, again, very complex, very philosophical. And so I thought, like, I mean, part of it is just, as you know from doing podcasts, it's fun to have the excuse to ask people questions and listen to them talk, right? Yeah. So that's like just a great thing. But also I wanted to learn about the perspectives of other people and how they approach this topic. Because of course everyone has dealt with nature in some way. I think it's pretty rare to imagine like a composer that hasn't engaged with a quasi-nature related topic in some way, at least once. I don't know, have you? Is that you? Now I'm thinking about you, not to put you on the spot, but, and it's okay if you haven't too. But
I don't think so.
Well,
not
there
yet.
you go. Next project for you, huh? Yeah. But anyway, that's not to, you know, say that necessarily everyone should. But my point is that like there's nothing original about it, right? Mm. Everyone has, you know, thought about it. So I just thought of all these different composers that I wanted to ask about their process, even composers who are not sort of like quote unquote known for engaging with the topic. I still wanted to hear their perspectives on nature, because it's something everybody thinks about in some manner. And I also wanted to hear from musicians about the way they're, you know, how it factors into their views on programming. And then that extended to like, other artists. So just, you know, there are kind of no rules in a way, but just I would ask questions related to nature and learn about different people's approach. And what I realized in those conversations too is, you know, like many people, I have many of my own strong opinions about things. But, you know, everyone has sort of their own different, unique perspective on like what is sort of the right way or what is a good way or to engage with a certain thing, that I start to realize there really is no right way or good way. And actually, like, I just said a moment ago, like, I'm not interested in these sort of surface level ways of engaging with nature. But it's not that I don't think that other people should. Mm-hmm. It's that me personally, I find it less interesting. So I guess my point is like, people are doing many different things, right? And I think that's as it should be. You know, people should have different approaches, and there should be different ways. and I think, I don't know, again, maybe it's just, maybe everyone knew this already, but it's something that I come to realize that through my discovering about these different perspectives is just, yeah, everybody has to kind of think for themselves and find their own way to engage with the things that matter to them. And I also wanted to bring awareness to like the idea for other people who are like me too, who are wondering about these things, and kind of inspire other people to think about the topic too.
Speaking of incorporating, say, like an idea inspired by nature, it reminds me of your recent piece, Meditations. And I remember there was this one moment in the piece where you were trying to show this sudden spike in like global climate temperature, and you did that through pitch. Yeah, I would love for you to talk about the piece and how you dealt with the issue of climate change in it.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, and thank you for helping me with the with man the electronics on that piece.
My pleasure.
I would be very curious actually about your perspective on that piece, or like what did you think of it? Because like I'll talk a little bit about it, but I would love to hear your honest thoughts and reaction too, because that piece, I mean, some pieces I write sort of just free, like the piece Fireflies that I mentioned. That piece was, I actually gave it the title later on, Fireflies, and I just wrote it left to right. I almost didn't think at all, I zoomed out. I would check to make sure, the proportions are correct and everything, but like I wrote that very sort of almost stream of consciousness, whereas Meditations, on the other hand, was very conceptual because I really wanted to write a piece in a way like it comes a little bit from my dissertation piece that I did when I was at UC Davis, which was a piano concerto. And in that piano concerto, I, wanted to write just an interesting piano composition. But I was also interested in like how to convey this kind of simultaneous nature of like both beauty and dread that we experience in our day-to-day lives. Like, you have to, you're watching war and destruction, as we were just talking about before the interview. You're watching, the icebergs melt and all this, right? But you still go to the park and you still, sitting with a friend having a conversation. You're still, enjoying a drink by the river or whatever, right? These beautiful life things, right, that are happening at the same time as all this destruction. And like I think that's really important to acknowledge, right? So I was wondering, like, okay, that's interesting. Does that mean I can write a piece of music that's about that? Maybe yes, maybe no, right? Not everything interesting can be a composition, I think. Sometimes things are just interesting. But here I am trying to write a composition, I guess, based on this. And I was also interested in the idea of like, so, dread for me in that piece was represented by increasing level of clock strikes. So 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, these clock strikes, which were meant to convey this sense of doom or dread, like time is ticking, And these clock strikes, they sort of happen very explicitly. They interrupt the music. They happen at random times. And this is something I did in my piano concerto, and it's something, the piano concerto never got a public performance. And hey, anyone listening, orchestras, I would love to talk to you if you're curious about that piece. So I wanted to try this sort of formal idea in another context as well, where I could get a performance. And so there's this, element of sort of doom or dread. And it's not just that, but it also has a kind of element of dream logic to it, meaning like it's sort of like when you sit down to listen to a piece, you expect the piece to unfold in a kind of organic way, right? And these clock strikes, for me, there are ways of sort of interrupting that and kind of breaking the rules that I'm establishing of a piece. So like, what does it feel like to listen to a piece? And, because as you know, from being a composer, like it's a lot about setting up certain balance between expectation and surprise, right? And so there's that balance that is always happening for a listener. And like, I'm really interested in how can I, as a composer, disrupt that feeling, that expectation in a really radical way, like something's wrong, like something's messed up, like that is impossible, surreal. but in a way that's still that doesn't sound like a mistake, feels like actually satisfying musically. And so that's kind of like the challenge or the ambition that I was going for in that piece on a kind of aesthetic level also. So those things like dream logic and then this notion of beauty and dread, those were concepts I was exploring. And the meditations aspect is like there are 4 movements, meditations on different topics. Meditation on silence and listening, meditation on the hockey stick graph, as you mentioned, the graph that shows the change in global temperature. The other one is a daydream, which is not a meditation, but like a spacing out of sorts, which is kind of like an intermezzo, like a playful, fun movement. I felt the piece really needed that because it was getting kind of heavy. So I think it was really necessary to add that movement. And then the final movement, which is meditation on eternity or geologic time. And that movement takes literal sounds from the ocean. And in this case, it was Plum Island in northern coast of Massachusetts. And those sounds are projected into speakers, and the performers sort of improvise with some aleatoric, passages in kind of coordination with the ocean. So my goal was to meditate on these things. Again, speaking of like paying attention to one's surroundings, right? So my goal of the piece was to offer the audience and the performers a meditation on these different aspects that are, in a way, like not necessarily, quote, about climate change in the way that a piece like Burning was, but in a way that they are about kind of like life experience in general. So I don't know if I was successful in that. But yeah, anyway, what were your reactions as you were listening to that piece? Like, what were some questions that you had or observations that you had?
It's kind of hard for me to say something off the top of my head because, as you know, I was in some ways in the performance and not really a spectator or like an audience member.
And I threw that on you at the last minute too.
Yeah. I think I did fine.
You did great. You did great. You saved the whole show. Yeah.
Well, my pleasure. I thought the clock strikes, for instance, like they added this narrative element to it. So it made sense for sure. And as you know, as you can elaborate, it was a part of a larger interdisciplinary project.
Right.
And so having the projection up on the screen, I think that made things gel together more. I'm curious about the interdisciplinary aspect of the piece because I think that adds a different layer of meaning into the whole experience because now it's no longer just sitting and listening to sounds and whatever. You're actively engaging with, say, visuals in this case, and even just the general theatrical nature of it. I remember at one point the performers were sort of walking around the stage in a, I don't want to use the word flamboyant, but in a dramatic manner. Yeah. And they had these firefly-looking things. So it was a different kind of experience for me, and I wish I was in the audience as well, maybe for the next performance. Yeah. But yeah, I'm curious about about what that experience was like for you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I have a film of the whole thing, so if you're curious to check it out, I'll be very happy to share that with you. Yeah. But so one of my other interests, in addition to kind of like this notion of dream logic and really like nature, and for me that question of like nature has shifted a lot, and I've like in my whole sort of compositional journey, and in some ways like I intentionally avoid engaging with nature too much because I already have kind of people who know me know that this is a topic of interest, but I'd also, in a way, I don't want to be pigeonholed either to that topic or imply that that's the only type of music that I'm interested in. But, dream logic, nature, and also, like, I want to use the word theatricality, but that's maybe too strong a word for the thing that is interesting for me. I guess, like, when I was in grad school, I was introduced to the field of ethnomusicology, and that field asks a lot of really important questions about, most commonly about music's outside of Western culture, but truthfully, ethnomusicology also includes the study of Western culture, really music in a cultural context, whatever region or culture that might be. And so it raised a lot of questions that I had never asked about music before, like what is happening when there's a performance, and like what are we all doing, like you go to see a string quartet, and there's a string quartet, but what about the people who arrived there, and what was their day like, like they're sitting down, and like what forces came together to make this event happen? What about the person who comes on stage and then says, hey, turn off your cell phones? And what about what is that whole experience like, So like, in other words, I was really interested in kind of music as not just sounds, but as a performance, and whether I write something explicitly theatrical or not, there's always, and I think most artists and most musicians understand this on some level, maybe with different levels of awareness, but a musical performance, anything that's live, it's theatrical, whether you want it to be or not. Mm-hmm. And so I think having an awareness of it can help us use those elements, those kind of like quote unquote non-sonic, non-musical elements to enhance the music. So I was really interested in exploring ways of dealing with that. Like one of the pieces that was on the program, I had the singer leave and go off stage, to represent, like a sort of message or poetic aspect of the piece, right? And so and of course it's always an experiment, right? Like there are things you can do in terms of theatricality that can seem really gimmicky or distracting, right? And so as a composer, like not only I'm trying to like always deal with sounds and chords and pitches and timbre, but also like kind of, these staging elements, and like what's too much, and what's enough, and did I go too hard on that? Was that too subtle that, I think it's very clear, but maybe the audience has no clue what I'm trying to say, So this is where like I encountered Neil Parsons. He's a member of a group called the Fourth Wall Ensemble, and their performances, like if you watch them on YouTube, they're really interesting. Like they're a trio who, they're all sort of trained musicians, but also they also have a background in theater and dance. And so many of their performances involve them playing their instruments while also doing these kind of like, in some ways comical, like, dance routines. Like sometimes literally playing a trombone hanging from a wire, or like, so all kind of like really like a spectacle, Right. And many of their productions have a humorous element to them, because they're meant to be like engaging in that way. But others of them are a little more subtle. So I thought that Neo was someone who I was really interested in and really respected. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we've gotten to know each other, and I really like admire what he does and his knowledge and his perspective that he brings. And so he seemed for me like the perfect person to engage with in this project and kind of get his input and get his perspective, because these are issues that he spends a lot of time thinking about. And he's actually he's a trombonist, and he majored in I think his major was in music, but but he also at Boko he teaches in the theater department, so he's not technically speaking in the music department, even though obviously he's professional musician. So those things were very interesting for me in the production.
For this piece, you also documented the whole process, because you created an Instagram account just related to the large project, which is titled Symbiosis. What was that experience like? And by that I mean, did you feel any different as you were documenting, let's say, some of your early sketches, or maybe an event, like a rehearsal or something like that? Because all of a sudden you're dealing with how you've been working on the piece in a very deliberate way, and it's no longer this play pause thing. You know what I mean? So I'm curious about how this journey of self-documentation impacted both the creation of the piece and maybe how you're looking at it now that it's been a few months since the piece was performed.
That's a really good question, and I think maybe I need to go back and actually go back on the Instagram page and look, because I mean, the project, like, to kind of give a little summary, like, you know, maybe a little more than a year ago, actually, just it would have been almost exactly a year ago that I was beginning the first sketches for the meditations. So I applied for a grant for this project that was like basically a portrait concert of, you know, all my compositions, including 2 world premieres, but one that emphasized the climate crisis in certain ways, and one that also involved a level of, you know, quasi theatricality as a concert performance, which is, you know, the thing that Neil was really instrumental in implementing. So, you were talking about the Instagram account and like documenting the process. And this is something I actually learned. You know, I was very lucky to be involved in a project with Ali Ross and Alyssa Schmidt, who are both on faculty in I believe the dance department and the theater department, respectively, and in Boston Conservatory. And they applied for a faculty-led innovation grant and included me in the project. They had seen my podcast, and they sent me an email saying, hey, you know, like, we're interested in nature and we're interested in the climate crisis, and we see that you are at Berkeley and you have this, you know, kind of interest in this topic, and like, we would like to work with you. And like, I thought, yeah, it sounds fascinating. I would love to do it. And so like, I won't try to describe. You can kind of look up that project. It's very like, but it was a very beautiful, intricate project that involved a lot of meetings, discussions, and for them, like, they really were keen to emphasize like the process of putting together, you know, this production. And it made me think a lot. I really learned a lot from that experience, and it made me think about the importance of the process. Like, as musicians, you know, we usually think like, we put a concert, that's the thing, right? The other stuff is like whatever, you know. I mean, we all know that the other stuff is what you spend most of your hours doing, right? But I think, as we were sort of discussing before this interview, like, you know, that part is actually important, and like, we should also try to enjoy it, right? And so, you know, I wanted to acknowledge the importance of the process, and also, like, as a teacher, you know, I wanted to show my students what it is like to produce a concert. And for me, this was the first time I'd actually like really been in charge of a production of my own stuff. I had this idea like in my early 20s that if you're a successful composer, then you just write music and people ask you to do projects, and that's it. You don't have to do anything else. And it was a very wrong idea. And I learned over, you know, pretty quickly over the years that that's not actually the case. And so, you know, I guess, I think a lot of times as you get older, you kind of are trying to show other people things that you wish somebody had sort of told you. Maybe people probably did tell me, and I just maybe didn't hear them, you know? But so part of it, there's a pedagogical aspect to it as well, of being transparent and avoiding this idea like, oh, this glamorous thing of we have this shiny product and here it is, but instead showing what is really happening and demystifying the whole process. And you know, I really try to document things. As you know, it takes effort to do that, right? On top of the effort that's already required to, you know, actually just make the piece. And there's a level of vulnerability too, as well, right? Like, the thing is not done. Like, I don't really. So there's a level of self-consciousness and curation that you have to think, like, you know, I want to show my progress, some of it, but like, man, there's this thing I'm a little embarrassed about. I don't want to show it yet, you know? So there's a lot of like, and there's a lot of sort of mental exhaustion, I think, that can happen with deciding, what am I going to share? What am I not going to share? Maybe other people are less self-conscious than me, and I applaud them for that. But I have a lot of that internal struggle. But I did really try to faithfully show people, like, here's what's happening, and here I have my sketches. Here Neil and I did this presentation. Here, you know, I'm creating this, you know, attempting to use, you know, electronics here and so on. And I think it offers like a good picture for other people who are interested in this kind of thing of what happened. And the sort of side benefit is also that, you know, it many people engage with it because they see this happening. And every time I bumped into someone, they would say, oh, yeah, don't you have that concert Symbiosis coming up? So there's kind of an unexpected benefit that came out of that. That wasn't like intended, but it also happened to work really well. I mean, it's content creation, right?
Yeah.
But Neil and I were very clear that we're not gonna like try and play with the algorithm. We're not gonna try and get views. We're just gonna use Instagram as a vehicle to post stuff and again document the process.
Yeah. You mentioned that this concert, it was just your compositions. So, as a follow-up, and as a question in itself as well, what was it like having an entire concert dedicated just to your music? Because this is not just like a senior recital or anything; it's like a proper concert. I think the only other time where I've been to a concert where it was just one composer's work, like multiple pieces by the same composer, it was Marty's.
Oh, okay.
And it was at Longy.
Mm-hmm.
But to have your own concert where it's just your early works and your current works and so on, I feel like in a way that concert is documentation as well. It's documentation of this long journey you've had. So how was that experience like for you?
I never thought of that way, but I think you're absolutely right. It is like a documentation of a journey that I've had. And most of those pieces, like, that's a very interesting question. Most of those pieces were all written after the pandemic, except for one. There was one piece called Decketh Joy, Water Destroyed that was written, a couple years before. But I feel like for me, I think, everyone was affected by the pandemic, and I was lucky not to, lose anyone. Like there were definitely some scary moments with, family. Like my dad was hospitalized during that time, but he's okay. He's fine now, thank God. But there was, lots of people suffered, right? And like, not everyone suffered equally. That's what I always say, but everyone at a minimum was dealing with the anxiety of the pandemic, right? So it was that year was a scary time, and I think it had an effect on my music, whether I like to admit it or not. I think as a result of like kind of the lockdowns and stuff, my style went, shifted from a kind of more flamboyant style to something a little more introverted sounding. And a lot of the pieces on the program reflect that style. And in a way, like part of the intention of the concert reflects the style too. Like I was just thinking about the titles of those pieces, like Meditations, right? Or Fireflies or Snow Day, right? These are sort of thought, like contemplative themes, right? And like, not that there's anything wrong with that, but like that is, I think over the years I have thought of what is, I always come back to this question of like, what is music and what can it do? For me, that helps me avoid writing music that's arbitrary or that doesn't need to exist. Like maybe I've told you this quote before from Tristan Murail, the spectral French composer, who he said, when you write a piece of music, you're stealing a little bit of someone's time. Oh. I think it's good. That my time has been stolen from a lot of people. Those are minutes of my life that I won't get back. So I think maybe it's a lot of pressure to put on oneself. But I guess my point is like, to write a piece that really, like, I think, oh, hey, here's 10 minutes. And yes, somebody should spend 10 minutes listening to this. If I don't think, like, if I cook something for you and it's not good, then I've just ruined your evening, Yeah. Like, I don't want to do that to people. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't mean I have to, pander to anyone, but it means that I should put a lot of care and meaning into what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. If I write a piece, then it should deserve to exist, So coming back to this question of like, what is music and what can it do? That's, and I think as I thought about the feeling of, lockdowns and isolations, I was, contemplating what could be the role of music, And one role of music, I think, is that it can foster like a meditative state, and it can foster like a space for us to kind of sit with our thoughts in a way that is different from literally trying to sit in silence, which I don't do. I don't meditate. I don't actually meditate, which maybe I'm a little bit of a fraud for writing a piece called Meditations. But I think for me, like writing a piece like that, it's my own attempt to meditate in both in composing it and in kind of like creating that experience for myself. But your question was actually about like the whole concert, right? And I mean, that was my own senior recital, like as a undergraduate. That was the last time I ever had a full program of my works performed, and that would have been like over 10 years ago, you know. So it was interesting, like I've never heard all my pieces back to back in that way. And of course you noticed trends, and like, you know, someone like my wife Sakurako, like she heard so much of my music, she's played so much of my music, so she's someone who, you know, points these things out to me and kind of knows them already. But it was, I mean, it was very interesting. When I sat down to listen to the concert, suddenly I became very self-conscious when I wasn't thinking of it before. I'm like, oh my God, this is all my music. You know, people are going to hear it like all back to back, you know. Not that I necessarily doubted it, but more like I just had never engaged with it in that way before. So I did notice certain trends, and like, I don't know, to hear them all back to back, yeah, it was very interesting. You know, certain trends, certain themes. Yeah, it was really interesting experience.
You mentioned your undergrad experience, which was in California, and I believe you spent the entirety of your educational life in California, and now you're on the East Coast, the other side of the country. How would you compare and contrast the music culture, maybe in specific the concert music culture, on both sides of the country?
Sure, yeah. So I think, yeah, moving to the East Coast was like a very important step for Sakurako and I to kind of like, I think we definitely needed like a change of pace, you know. And I was definitely nervous about moving, you know, because when I moved here, like I didn't have any job prospects at the time. Okay. So I just moved, you know. I mean, Sakurako, she was applying to some graduate programs, and so that was sort of the impetus for us to come here. Right. But you know, I think, I mean, California it's a good scene, and you know, the Bay Area has a lot of stuff going on. Sacramento has some stuff going on. What I always say about Sacramento is like, there's a lot of really talented people who are there, but I just feel that there is not the institutional support that those people deserve. That they don't have the bandwidth that they need to to have more activities. Like, I think if there was more support like for them, there would be a much richer musical scene than there is there. And like, I had a great experience in Sacramento, you know. Like, there are many great ensembles that are there and great players. I learned so much. So many people who supported me. Like, I was really grateful for all that experience. And many great ensembles in the Bay Area as well. But I will say, like, moving to a place like Boston or the East Coast, the density is just so much more. And there's just so many more. It's so much busier. There's so much more stuff. Like, you know, like when I was living in Sacramento, like I would be able to put on my calendar like events I was interested in. You know, I would in the fall I would say, here are the ensembles that I like. You know, different groups like City Water was a group. I think they're still, you know, playing in there now, and like other groups. And I would mark my calendar of I'm going to go to these. I tried to do that when we were in Boston, but it doesn't work because there's just too many, right? Yeah. And then also events sort of just pop up too that you didn't know about, and so in a way, like, that's the really exciting thing about being here. And you get really big artists, obviously, that come, and it's, you know, it's kind of like, yeah, Boston's a small city, right, compared to somewhere like New York, but still, like, you know, it has a really big international connection, and I think it's been very interesting and stimulating and exciting. And we've both found the music scene, people here, to be very welcoming and you know, open to meeting with us and, you know, collaborating and this sort of thing. So it's been overall, like, Boston's been very good to us. We really, yeah, it feels like a good fit, I think.
Cool. Well, as you know, I'm moving to California soon, so I think I too needed the change of pace. It's not just the music or the job or whatever. It's also just the life.
Yeah, and I want to say California is big too, you know. Exactly. So like for me, like, we were in Northern California, and then Cal Arts, remind me where.
It's in Santa Clarita, so slightly north of LA proper, as they call it.
Great. I mean, and LA has a like really big music scene also, I think. So I'm really curious to hear what your time is like there. I actually didn't spend that much time in LA, but yeah, it's gonna be really interesting for you there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. You know, I like some of the more superficial aspects of it, like the weather, and I'm not looking forward to commuting very much
Yeah.
because I still don't know how to drive. So I'll figure it out. I'm planning on taking an e-bike, a folding e-bike on the
Yep.
train or something like
Yeah.
this. In a way, it's better for the environment too,
True.
right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's cheaper, but yeah, let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Well, this concludes. I always say this. I need a new line, but this concludes the formal portion of this interview, and now we will have a fun activity. So I prepared a tier list for you, and a tier list. Well, I should.
Okay, I know what this is. I've seen this. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
I just need to do some OBS acrobatics here. Let's see. Okay. I don't know why it's so small, but I can change it like so. I think that looks good enough. Okay, so for anyone who's not familiar with this format, the way it works is you have all these different options and you need to place them in a certain category. So S means, I don't know what it stands for, but S is like,
Supreme, maybe.
yeah, maybe
Supreme.
supreme. And then A, B, C, D are, just, it's like a ranking system. So for instance, if I really, really loved solo woodwind as an instrumentation for a piece, I would put that in S. And if I really hated electroacoustic music, I would put that in this category. So I would like you to rank your personal list here.
Yeah.
So we can start off with string quartet. Where would you place that on the list?
Okay, and there's no limit to how many can be in each category. Okay. And the list of like, is it like writing or listening or both maybe?
Maybe both.
Okay. Looking at all these, I think I'm gonna put it in A.
Okay. So string quartet goes, wow.
Wheel of Death is turning.
Yeah, that's not good. There we go. All right, string quartet A. How about large orchestra?
Large orchestra, and we don't have chamber. So that's just orchestra here. I'm
Right.
gonna put that in S. This is actually very easy for me.
Mm-hmm. You can say more if you like. If,
Yeah. I mean, it's just so fun. There's so many colors. Orchestra to write for.
Right. Let's skip solo piano for now.
Okay. Good idea, because I have a very strong personal connection.
Right. I want to save that for later.
Okay.
How about a pierrot ensemble?
I'm gonna. I think I'm gonna put that in. This is actually hard. I'm debating A or B actually, although I don't know. I think string quartet. I think I'm gonna I'm gonna move string quartet to B, and then Pierrot goes to A.
Okay.
They're close though.
By the way, this can also be just about how much you enjoy writing for any of these ensembles. So
I'm gonna make it. Well, let's make it how I enjoy writing for them.
Okay, cool. So far the list looks fine.
Looks good. Yeah, looks good.
Okay. How about percussion?
Percussion.
And this could be, let's say, I mean, I'm sure you would agree. Let's say you have like a cello. Let's say you have a pierrot ensemble. Does that include percussion? I don't think so, right? Not traditionally.
Traditionally, no. But I think nowadays, if you say pierrot, like from Schoenberg, right, the pierrot lunaire. But I think now, it's like the percussion replaced the singer, kind of, So I would say pierrot can include percussion.
Right.
In my definition. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, when I meant percussion in this list, I didn't necessarily mean just like a solo percussion thing,
Okay.
or let's say like a percussion trio, like ictus percussion.
Mm-hmm.
But it could also be, incorporating percussion into a piece.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm curious where you would place that, because for me it really changes things, the timbres you can get
Yeah,
and things like
absolutely.
that. So
Yeah. Okay. I think I will put. I'm gonna put percussion in A. I'm actually gonna put string quartet back in A too.
okay. I mean, it doesn't have to be.
I'm not worried about hurting anyone's feelings, by the way.
Okay,
If that's
that's
what you're
good.
worried. I don't care. I don't mind having a controversial opinion about these.
And you don't need to like force yourself to put something in category C or D
Okay.
either. Like if you really love all of these, they can be in S and A. But at the same time, it would be cool if you can say, oh, I really hate
Yeah.
so and so. So yeah, I put chamber here. I'm not sure exactly what I meant, but it could be any other category that you perceive in like this classical music world.
I'm gonna put it in S.
What are some of your favorite chamber combinations, or just chamber ensembles?
I like cello, piano, and percussion, or cello, piano, and clarinet. I think like cello, piano plus one instrument is a really nice sound.
Can you name some pieces by, say, composers you've liked in the past who've done that combination?
Yeah, there's a piece by Chinri Ung, who is in California, called Spiral. I think it's Spiral 1. He has a whole Spiral series, which I think you would appreciate. And I think that's the one that's for cello, piano, and percussion.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then my teacher's Stephen Bloomberg, my teacher from undergrad. He has a piece called Aura that's for piano trio with piano, cello, and clarinet, which is a really beautiful piece also.
Cool. How about concerto? I know you, for your PhD thesis, you wrote a concerto, which was, the thesis was about Unsuk Chin's cello concerto. So I know you've written a concerto. Where would you place that in this list?
And this is, I think we have to specify, like, so these are like, for me, I'm writing them, right?
Right.
As a composer perspective. Okay. I think I'll put that in S also.
Okay.
As like a listener, especially for modern ones, I would put it in, I mean, you can keep it there, but for like as a listener, I'd put it in like C maybe, because I think there's a lot of composers who kind of like, they want to write a concerto, they have the chance to write a concerto, but they don't really want to write a concerto. That's just my personal opinion, because a concerto is supposed to be somewhat virtuosic, right? Or at least like feature the soloist prominently. And I think, even to be honest, even like Unsuk Chin's other concertos, the cello concerto is a little bit of an exception, but I mean, her other concertos, they're great pieces, like, don't get me wrong, but they're not, I almost feel like, why are they concertos? They're just, because she's sort of she's blending the instruments so much, and her and many other like modern composers, they're blended so much that it's like, it's really just a chamber piece, which is not bad, but I just feel like the thing with concerto is like the display, and that's one of the reasons I love her cello concerto so much, is because it does have that element of display. So that's a kind of fun thing.
I feel like in general, now that I think about it, concertos seem slightly archaic in some sense, because in the past they definitely had a lot of concertos, but when I listen to more contemporary music these days, it seems like a chamber thing, or like an orchestral thing where individuals aren't necessarily emphasized, or even the general idea of taking a solo, it's a lot less clear in some of these contemporary contexts. Do you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's an aesthetic thing that's like, I mean, like, if you think of like the Baroque, there's a concerto grosso, right? And that's like the emergence, like Vivaldi, that's kind of like the birth of that genre, right? And then like in the 19th century, it becomes like the interest in virtuosity, right? And display and drama, which like the concerto is perfectly suited for, like a protagonist, like a single soloist, who's like a hero, right? And then like the 20th century is really in many ways turning there are still great like concerti in the 20th century, and there's still that, there's a lot of diversity of style. So there's still like pieces in the 20th century that have that sensibility. But I think the aesthetic changes. I mean, I love pieces like Ligeti cello concerto or even Feldman, like piano and orchestra, which he doesn't call concerto, but I love those pieces. But they're not like, I just think a concerto, it has to be, for me, there has to be some drama or some virtuosity. But I think you're right. I think it has a lot to do with what people like aesthetic or artistic preference are. So for me, composing, yeah, I would put concerto very high. Yeah.
The next combination on our list is voice or choral music. Okay. So it could be, anything that comes to your mind. Maybe like solo voice, which is one category, or even like a large choir.
Got it. Okay, I actually feel very eager to write for choir. I've never written for choir before. I've written some art song. I'm gonna put it in. I think I'm gonna put it in.
I was gonna hear a B.
I'm gonna do B, not because I don't. And what's kind of ironic is I actually think I happen to be very good at writing for a voice, but I think it's scary for me because each person's voice is so different, and like I also have a really deep respect for texts, and writers and all this, and like I said, like my most successful pieces have been my vocal pieces, but I think it's just, I don't know, somehow it feels. I still enjoy it. I mean, I enjoy anything. I enjoy the opportunity to write anything. But I think somehow it's like uncomfortable. So whereas for these other groups, I don't know. It's feels more natural. Yeah.
Relatable.
Yeah.
Let's go in this order. So what about writing for a solo string instrument?
I'm gonna put that at C.
Have you ever written like a solo string instrument before? String piece before?
Yes, I have a few. I have this. There was a solo cello piece that David Russell played, which, I mean, he like played the shit out of that piece. I was so happy, and that piece I wrote in grad school actually at UC Davis, and I have a piece that I wrote for Kurt Rohde that was commissioned by an artist named Peter London, who I interviewed on my podcast. And so yeah, it's really hard, like to write. I feel like I did an okay job, but I think it's just so hard to write an interesting piece for solo string or solo instrument. There's a lot of colors, but like without the other textures available, I think it's very difficult. Yeah.
The next one is solo woodwind.
Sorry.
Solo flute.
I'm sorry, but yeah, we're gonna have to put that in D. And actually, like, this is an assignment, that it's like one of the first composition assignments that you get, like, if you're learning composition, like to write a solo woodwind piece. And there are great pieces out there. I think it's so much harder to write a good solo woodwind piece. They exist, but I think as a proportion of music out there, the number of them that are good is small compared to maybe other genres. It's more difficult. I applaud people who write great and there are great pieces out there, often by people who are actually like play the instrument themselves. But it's possible, but it's really difficult, and it's really difficult to make it interesting.
Right. On a personal note, I definitely haven't tried to write a solo woodwind piece. And
you have to now. That's your next assignment.
Well, we'll see. But I'm curious, what kind of solo piece do you think would be just the most painful experience to write for? Or even to listen to?
To listen to.
Maybe both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've had the experience of very painfully listening to like a string quartet or piano piece. That can be painful if it's done badly. Right. And it can be painful to listen to, or it can be enjoyable to listen to something that's much harder. But like overall, speaking generally, see, I'm wanting to say tuba, but I would actually love to hear a solo tuba piece because it's so weird. This is actually really hard. I think just like overall, what do I not want to hear? I think I'm gonna say bassoon. Sorry, bassoon. But you know, like I've heard some actually great solo bassoon players, and like they often, I don't know why, but oftentimes, well, maybe I do know why, but like they often will use like a delay pedal, you know, and they play with loops.
Yeah.
And I actually think like that's really smart. I think it's a great idea because you need to add that like extra texture, you know.
Right.
I think your ear just gets tired of the sound after a while. Sorry, bassoon people. I apologize, but yeah, that would be probably what I have to go with. And it's, I mean, this is why like a lot of solo wind pieces, they're often combined with electronics,
Right.
because you kind of almost, yeah, it's just, and they can be great, but you kind of need that extra something, you know. I think.
I think my vote, I was just trying to think of the dumbest thing I could think of. Maybe like a solo woodblock piece or something like this. Like, how would you make it interesting?
Or actually, I'm gonna change my answer from bassoon to piccolo.
Oh yeah.
Piccolo is gonna be kind of rough.
Yeah.
It only works if it's really short, I think. Which again, not that it's like bad, but like, you know, that's enough now. You know, like you know, even like, you know, like limoncello. You know, you're supposed to have just a little. I mean, I guess some people can really drink. Like for me, it's a little hard to drink a lot, but you get my point. Yeah, woodblock could be interesting. Do you know Alvin Lucier? He has a piece called, I can't remember it's kind of a long title, but it's a solo triangle piece. No. You should check that out. I think that's actually a great piece, and it's literally for solo triangle.
Oh, cool.
And like, there's so many different sounds in the triangle that you didn't know about that were there. The score is kind of like instructs the player to sort of, it's not like fully notated. It's a little bit of an instruction, like to I don't remember what exactly it says, but like you're supposed to kind of be attentive to the different sounds and kind of try moving the beater to different places. And like I heard a performance by that, and it actually takes a good player to do that piece. And it's literally like, I think it's half an hour long. Oh, yeah. And it's just like, it's this, but you hear this, it's like kind of very mesmerizing, you know? Right. And like, that was really one of the most interesting pieces I've ever heard. But woodblock, that's a good challenge too. You may have to come up with like some other ways of playing, you know? Maybe like I think you could get a lot of mileage with just a regular beater, you know? Like just rhythm. These are all, by the way, these are all really good compositional challenges. From a composer, like to make you think differently, to write for something that's hard, because it's gonna make you think way more creatively than like, here, write a, you know, even like something like solo piano, for example. It's like there's so many cliches and there's so many there's kind of, I think in a way there's a lot of baggage. Right. And whereas like writing for a solo woodblock, it's like a puzzle, you know, and it's gonna make you think creatively. But yeah, you could probably come up with some little, you know, swishing, or maybe use a stick. Like, I bet you could actually come up with an interesting piece. Yeah,
that triangle piece sounds cool. I was just thinking of the resonance, and especially since I've heard I'm sitting in a room which has that kind of quality to it, mesmerizing. I imagine, you know, even if it was just like a soft trill that happened for 30 minutes or something like that, my perception of the trill would change over time, I feel, because I would have no other choice but to find something in there. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Or get your phone out, like what people do at concert, which is so sad that like I think after the pandemic it somehow became more socially acceptable for people to be on their phone. I don't know if you've noticed that, but like anyway, but yeah, we were talking before about the importance of being bored, you know, and like to put your attention on something. It's kind of like I don't know, like my dad, maybe other people relate to this. My dad would, anytime I was a kid, I would say that I'm bored. My dad would say, only boring people get bored. And that would make me be quiet. So.
Well, you mentioned how bassoon players usually use some kind of a delay pedal. So maybe we'll skip to electroacoustic music. So I know in the meditations piece, you did incorporate electronics because I was in charge of it. So I know that for sure. And it's not typical for you to write an electroacoustic piece. So I'm curious where you would put this thing.
Okay, so I'll give two answers here. If in terms of like me using electronics, just like the kind of the difficulty of it, I would put it at a D, because I feel like I don't know music if I do that.
Right.
But as far as if I was actually good at it, then I would put it on I think I put it on S.
Oh wow.
So I don't know how you will interpret that. I'm gonna make you interpret that.
Maybe I don't want to do a halfway thing and put it in B, but you know what? As someone who loves electronics, I'm going to affirm your
Okay.
interest in it and say, yeah, that could turn out well. I mean, honestly, like personally, I haven't really resonated too much with the electroacoustic medium, but I feel like there is something that could be done there.
Yeah. Do you know Eleni Lilios' music?
Yeah, I had a master class with her actually.
Okay, you met her when she was here at Berkeley. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think her electroacoustic music is really good. I think she's like really knows how to do it, in my opinion.
I should check it out.
Yeah.
So let's go to duos now. You mentioned your piece Fireflies. I believe I've heard a performance of it and I really enjoyed it. But this doesn't have to be like a violin duo. It could be any kind of duo.
Yeah. I actually I think what's really would be the hardest is to write for like solo instrument and piano, because it's sort of, I think it's so easy to fall into a default of melody and accompaniment.
Right.
And I think to avoid that is really hard. So I'm gonna kind of not include that in my way of thinking. I mean, maybe for that reason it's a good challenge too. But I think I think I would put it in S, duos, because I think, well, the experience of writing the violin duo, I think it forces you to really think of like the small sounds of the two players. And like that's true for writing a solo piece as well, but I think with two players you can actually, well, for one thing, you can write counterpoint. Not that you have to write counterpoint, but you can. And it's just, I don't know, it frees up, I mean, it's literally twice as many instruments, you know.
Right.
So it's like it's double the instrumentation, but also it's very small and intimate. So
Right.
I actually like it. Yeah.
Speaking of that concept of, let's say, how intimate a performance feels, I feel like solo music is that way. But then there's this huge leap. I feel like duos can be even more intimate than a solo piece, because now it's two people interacting with each other. And then once you move from a duo to a trio and so on and so forth, I feel like that whole concept of intimacy gets more and more blurred and less relevant. But duos, I feel like they're just in a special category of their own.
Yeah, I totally agree, because you're watching people interact. Yeah.
Right. And I mean, I love, say, jazz piano trios, and like there can be so much that happens there. But if it's a duo, like let's say just a bass player and a pianist, it's kind of like seeing an interview where two people are speaking to each other, as opposed to a discussion between 3 people and 4 people. There's some kind of quality that I feel like just tapers off. But it's highest during a duo, and lowest in a, say, orchestral setting. Yeah, it's weird. It's interesting. Well, we saved probably the best one for last, because I know you've written a lot of solo piano music, and your wife's a pianist, and you've written a lot of pieces for her. So, I think I know where this is going.
Well,
but
I think I'm gonna get in trouble if I don't put it higher. But also, I mean, like, you can go ahead and put it in S. But in a way, it's actually almost very difficult for me to answer, because it's like I mean, with vocal music being kind of like, I should stop saying that. I've been saying for so long that I'm like new at vocal writing, but I've been writing vocal music actually a really long time. I actually never wrote any vocal music when I was an undergrad, actually. So maybe that's why I feel it's distant for me. But like, I think piano is the opposite, where like, you know, piano is my principal instrument, and like I feel very close to it, and I really love. What I like about piano is like the resonance of it too. You know, it has like its own sort of really like attractive sound envelope to it, and I think you can get, there's just so much color that you can get out of it. It's really, I mean, people always say like strings have the most color. I mean, which is true. Like they do have a lot of color. There's a lot of things you can do, but like I think piano, people underestimate the amount of color that is actually available to the piano, even excluding extended techniques.
Right.
Yeah.
I recall watching a piece that you performed. So maybe during some of your earlier stages, you were like this pianist composer person, and then now I feel like you've transitioned more so in a composer role as opposed to a, let's say, pianist composer role.
Yeah.
Has your perception of the piano itself, or maybe writing for piano, changed with that transition?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, like, definitely, like when I was in undergrad, I did perform a lot more. You know, I play pieces of my friends and all this, and like I never managed to like balance practicing and composing.
Right.
Some people do it, and like I'm always jealous of them, but I never managed to do that. But I mean, yeah, I think now, I mean, I try to stay close to the piano, and like, you know, of course, the input from my wife and other pianists who I get to work with like is very helpful too. But yeah, I don't know. I think actually now, like lately, like recently, I wrote another piece that was commissioned by Peter London, which, you know, are 3 etudes after 3 of his visual art pieces. And in those pieces, I was trying to like, I was really, I mean, it doesn't sound like it, may not sound like this on the surface, but I was really in my head channeling like Chopin and Liszt as like models for idiomatic piano writing. So the harmonic language and like the formal things are different, but like trying to get to something that like a pianist would really respect and enjoy and appreciate playing from an idiomatic perspective. In addition to like, you know, paying attention to the sounds. So yeah, I don't know, like maybe the answer is actually that it hasn't changed all that much, weirdly, as you would think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this concludes the fun activity. I hope all of that went through. And now I'm just going to be a little professional and go back to the keynote. There we go. I forgot to switch the slide. Well, that was a fun activity.
Oh, fun activity.
And yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for the conversation, Ryan. I really enjoyed this. Where can people find you on the internet?
So I have a website, ryansuleiman.com, and like at this moment, like I'm switching websites. So like if you type it in now, it won't show up, but it'll show up. It'll probably show up in a few days. So most likely, it won't be a problem. I don't think people are like clamoring to get to that website. But I am also on Instagram, at Ryan the Composer. I have SoundCloud as well, and yeah, hope to see you there.
Yeah. Well, I was actually one of those people trying to get on your website because I was trying to like make notes. Cool. Yeah, I usually wait for just a few seconds, maybe like 30 seconds or something, because sometimes the stream gets cut off lately. It's happened to me once, but I've been paranoid since then.
Yeah.
So my guest and I, we just sit.
You must sit in silence.
Sit in silence. Richard said the same thing, you know, sit in silence. And I always think back to my own string quartet, sitting in silence, because it's, yeah, interesting way for that piece to come up again and again. But, yeah.